Sure.
All right, and we've hit, on my watch, just about to hit 3 here. So best of luck to you guys. And again, I'll start us off before I hand it. Should I hand it to you first, Marc, or to you, Kylie?
Go ahead and do that.
Okay. All right. Here we go. I'll just have to continually hit admit all. All right, welcome everybody. We're just going to give a few moments here for people to get their audio settled in. And as you may have noticed, this is a Zoom meeting. So you'll probably want to mute your microphones as you come in. All right, so that's pretty good critical mass, and I'll make sure that I type this out for everybody that comes in a bit later, but welcome to today's webinar. So as opposed to most of our webinars that use Zoom webinar, we're actually using Zoom meeting for this one. So your cameras and microphones are enabled. During open discussion periods, you can feel free to just unmute your microphone and speak. Of course, if you're unable to do that for whatever reason, then you can also use the chat function just like you would with any other Zoom meeting. If there's a lot of people trying to speak, we'll try to manage that using the hand raise feature, but we'll kind of play that by ear based on what discussion ends up ultimately looking like. If you have any issues, technical issues, things like that, feel free to send me a direct message. We are recording this session today, and we'll also be saving the chat log just as a resource for everybody. I'll make sure that I send a file of that along after we conclude. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Marc Booker.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really grateful and excited for you to be here for our first ever Transfer and Articulation Community of Practice Forum. So my name is Marc Booker. I'm the Vice Provost of Strategy at the University of Phoenix. Won't get into a full bio, but I have a large background in transfer and articulation, to include being the current committee chair for the Transfer and Articulation Committee. Also joining me today is Kylie Borges from Stanford. Kylie, I'll give you a second to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am Kylie. Like Marc said, I work at Stanford. I'm the Associate Registrar for Degree Progress and Degree Audit. I've been, I think, working with Marc pretty much since 2016 in various different ways through ACRO and TACRO, different organizations. I've been on the Transfer and Articulation Committee since, I think, 2016, 17. And have definitely been nose deep, actually not knees deep, nose deep in transfer stuff and all things transfer this past year with COVID. So I know this was a really exciting sort of opportunity for us to get together. So I'm really excited for our first session for this today. So thank you all for coming today.
All right, thanks, Kylie. And to give credit where credit is due, this is somewhat the brainchild of Kylie. As transfer has become such a bigger activity and item in higher education, recent events and many other things, as the Transfer and Articulation Committee, we wanted to find different ways to engage the ACRO community and help grow our needs and our professional development. So to kind of give you and set the table for this in today's discussion is, this is an open forum. So for those who have joined open forums before, it's really a place to share and discuss current trends or things that are going on in our community around transfer and articulation. Just recently, ACRO had its transfer conference. I'm sure many of you attended that. If you didn't, I think there's some recordings of it. I highly, highly encourage you to check that out. Get in touch with Seth Common or Katie Schweintek. They have some information on it, but it was a great event to talk about transfer and articulation and the issues of student mobility and credit. And our committee, as the Transfer and Articulation Committee, decided to take a page out of that playbook and really engage you by seeing what can we do to help our peers and discuss some of the kind of sticky wickets or problems that are happening these days in the transfer world, because there is a lot and things are getting more and more complex. So that's what brings us here today. In simple terms, the goals of the forum is just to create a shared space where our members of the community can engage in transfer topics or the handling of unique scenarios, and to create connections with others on a phone a friend basis. I have done many presentations, whether it be ACRO, PACRO, CALE, even EDUCAUSE on transfer credit, mobility, been involved in studies. And the most valuable thing that has come out of all that is being able to support my peers and colleagues in higher ed on kind of the weird things that happen in transfer credit, because there's a lot of weird things that happen in transfer credit. And so within that, we created this space. And so today is going to be a little bit different in a way, because we don't know exactly where this will all go in the future as far as a forum. So we have a few set of topics and some guided discussion and some guided information to talk through with all of you today. But part of the things that we want to do later on is also get feedback from you, our colleagues, on things that you would want to see or to discuss in future forums, or even what the cadence of future forums would be. We wanted to create a world where us who work in transfer credits and support the students that are mobile are able to do so, and are able to kind of bounce things off of each other, almost like a caucus, even though it's more of a community of practice. And so with that being said, just a couple of housekeeping things as we continue to get started. So as Mike had mentioned, this is a Zoom meeting right now. So if you want to be on camera, turn your camera on. If you don't, turn your camera off. It is an area where your mics are open, so we don't have everyone on the magical all mute process. So everyone can open their mic if they have a question or a comment. You can also comment in the chat. So if you have a question in the chat about a topic we're discussing or anything like that, Kylie is monitoring the chat. There will be a few times as we go through some of these topics that I'll throw to her for any of her feedback. But for right now on these topics, I'm going to be more guiding and facilitating. And again, this is not necessarily how this has to go all the time. It's just the best way for us to get our feet wet today as we kind of spin up this forum. So with that being said, we sourced in our committee in the, I'll show you the names later on as we get towards the end of this meeting of who is on the Transfer and Articulation Committee, but we sourced some major ideas and trends that are happening in higher ed related to transfer that we knew that you may be interested in, the committee was definitely interested in, and would be some good discussion prompts. And again, depending on how you are feeling most appropriate to engage, use the chat or open mic, but I'll start things off, and I'll also provide a little bit of narrative around expertise and my knowledge on these topics to get things going. So the first trend and the first topic area that's been really, really important in the transfer world is, what have you had to change because of COVID? And that is a big, big, big area, and we know it is, but it's also a very important area. There are many institutions that, because of COVID, students decided to take studies elsewhere and then come back to their home institution, or even because of COVID, now life circumstances have changed. They're getting back in the swing of things, and they may have been one of the 40 million students that have some college credit but no credential. And so what we've heard is, though, although freshman enrollments may not have been from a high level basis where people expected, there's a lot more transfer students, and there's a lot more transcripts coming in and transfer credits. And so within that, there's a lot of discussion on what kind of modifications or policy changes have had to occur in light of COVID, and are there any best practices out there? So in light of that, let me talk about a few high-level things before we kind of open it up for people's feedback or where they want to take this topic in the discussion. But a lot of the policy changes that have been going on in certain cases have been around deadlines and due dates. So when transfer credit operations are stressed to the max, which includes both the inflow and outflow of transcripts. So on one end, people are ordering more transcripts, so the registrar's office that sends those out may be hitting a high level of volume. So receipt of transcripts is slower, and as a result, there may be delays in processing, and vice versa, because certain areas in the transfer office are staffed to a certain capacity, they're getting more transfer students, and then the volume is slower. So how do you handle those type of things? Well, a lot of institutions, if they haven't done it before, are looking on conditional processes. So they'll either look at unofficial transcripts or delays in evaluations to at least get a setup on what they assume the student would be coming in with, or understanding where their award level should be, or for those who are in Title IV or using Title IV, where their aid level could be based on the transfer of credits. And there's a lot of getting creative with knowledge that you have in hand based off of what student provides on a conditional basis or provisional basis that gets then validated later on. So that is a few policy changes that are happening, as well as making some more tight deadlines in place in regards to when students get things, or actually even picking up the phone and calling other institutions to say, can I get a validation back of what the student's performance is? And so those are some of the policy changes, because it's not as easy, or is not a clean throughput of a process as it normally has been that's going on. Again, it's usually flexibility in time or flexibility in policy that are going on that you're starting to hear because of that. And largely it's because of volumes that are happening in light of those items. So I'm going to stop there as kind of the preamble. And Kylie, I know this is something that came from you too in Stanford, for anything you want to add to this, and then kind of throw it out for people that wanted to ask questions about what schools are doing in the chat, how people are handling it, or even their best practices. So Kylie, take it away just for a few seconds on this one.
Sure. Stanford definitely had to revisit a lot of its policies, I think, when COVID hit, mostly because we don't really audit our transfer credit policies and processes on a sort of ongoing basis. And so we had some pretty antiquated things written into the policy that, you know, we knew probably needed to get reviewed or looked at by, you know, the various sort of faculty committees, but weren't really forced to do that until COVID hit, and it was like, oh, we have a ton of students taking, you know, everybody switched to online classes was a big one. You know, and our graduate transfer credit is, we don't allow, or we didn't allow any online credit to be counted for that. And for undergraduates, it was capped at, I think, like 15 units, I think. So like we had to think through, like, should we still have this ban? Is this a meaningful ban or limitation on online credit, knowing that Stanford is requiring all of our classes to be online, basically? You know, we're basically saying that it was the same sort of rigor. So why do we have these policies? So there was a lot of different things that we looked at, you know, definitely echoing the whole thing about being more flexible with deadlines. I think I saw Gabby Mansour hop on here, and like she was the one, like, boots on the ground. Like, we only have one person managing transfer credit at Stanford, and it's her. So she definitely felt the impact. We had a 400 on average % increase in the number of transfer credit related inquiries that we received, in forms and stuff like that, we received through from quarter to quarter. So it was a pretty steep hike in just everything we were dealing with. So she was navigating, how am I supposed to, like, what do I do with unofficials? How do I get officials when, you know, nobody's in the office to use the printer with that fancy paper? I think another thing that we looked at was the different types of work that we allowed. So I know PLA is listed, prior learning, was it prior learning experience? Is that the right? Sorry, I'm getting my acronyms mixed up. I'm thinking of prior learning credit. But like, we also looked at what other types of credit do we allow at Stanford, and do we need to revisit that? One of the things included like military credit that is done on like an ACE transcript or the JST transcript. And then one of the last sort of things was thinking about just adjustment to processes. So not so much necessarily deadlines, but like, you know, one of the policies that we encoded in our policy that all transfer credit had to go, you know, tunnel through the registrar's office for review first before it would go to the department. And so that was creating a sort of bottleneck with that 400% increase that we had to sort of figure out, how do we adjust this? So Gabby's suggestion was to actually open it up to give students the option. So there was a lot of different ways that we were impacted. I think it was just really trying to push these through and get these on like the radar of Senate and the other faculty groups who really didn't see this, I don't think, up front as an issue, because they were like, oh yeah, we just use whatever policies we have. I think that was before we realized how big all of the decisions that the campus was making. We'd basically have to review the bulletin or our course catalog every single time a decision was made to see how it impacted all of the things we were doing in the registrar's office, which is very exhausting, but we've become expert I didn't know. But yeah, it's a lot of the same kinds of things on here with deadlines, flexibility for students, and handling the process, but also the types of work that we accepted. So that was definitely a big thing that we saw. Yeah, so that's my piece.
All right, thanks, Kylie. And I think that's a good setup. So in the chat, I had indicated if anyone has a question about this topic or a specific thing they're running into at their campus or even a best practice, feel free to share that. Or if you want to take a few seconds to come off mic and share that too. Again, this is an open forum, so I want to give you the opportunity to do so.
Hi.
Oh, Kimberly, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, I have a question for the Stanford speaker. You said it was an increase of 400, but how many on average transfers do you generally bring in per year?
Great question. So Stanford, when we talk about transfer, when I'm talking about transfer, and when I'm thinking about the inquiries that we were sort of capturing metrics for, which was where the 400% increase came from, we were talking about just all like help tickets, the number of forms that we were receiving. So it was really it was a smattering of different things we were tracking. Stanford itself only admits, I think, like on average, it's like 20 students, but that number has been steadily increasing. And of course, last year it like doubled to I think 100% increase. It doubled it completely. So it's definitely an intense sort of increase, not only in the inquiries, but also transfer students. So the number of students that we admit via the transfer admissions process is pretty low compared to like our larger like undergraduate student body. But the number of Stanford students that end up taking transfer credit is closer to like 30–40%. So it's like a pretty big population of Stanford. And this was even before COVID, where we saw students that would take like, a couple of classes at BYU or at Foothill College or at other sort of institutions to help get them closer to graduation. So yeah, it was sort of a mix that we had, but yeah, that's sort of how we track that. So the actual increase in transfer admits wasn't the 400. It was just the number of inquiries and forms and things that we were tracking that we saw a pretty huge spike in. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Ooh, got a number of questions in here. All right, so I'm going to go through these one at a time.
Yeah, Kylie, so one of them I'll throw to you right now because it's more tied to you because you had an online versus non-online learning question was, since schools often don't identify a course in their learning modality, how did you monitor the 15 hours? So that one's directly at you.
So I will preface all of this by saying these policies, the transfer credit policies that Stanford has were written, I think, in like the 80s or 90s. And that was probably the last time anybody had looked at them. So when I said they were antiquated, I don't mean like super ancient, but they weren't current policies. And so some of the thinking behind why we even had that policy was around like, hey, what did online classes really look like in the 90s? And what, there was concern about the rigor of the classes. Is this up to par, up to snuff with the Stanford classes? And at the time, the answer to that was no. And so it was always in the sort of policy that this was a no-go. But to answer the specific question about how do we track this, we really didn't. Stanford has a really interesting sort of process for how we do transfer credit, which is that we do evaluations on a course-to-course basis. So we'll look at, oh, I see you took this English class at Foothill. This is what it translates to Stanford in the evaluation. But the actual posting of credit is more done in blocks. So if they got 5 classes from Foothill, we post the 20-something units or whatever, call it Foothill, and that's the end of the story. So we don't actually post it one course-to-course yet. We are going to eventually get there. But because we didn't have course-to-course articulation in the system, there was no like systemic way to audit it. So the way that we've been doing it for all of these years has very much been a manual process. And again, one person managing all of the transfer credit for Stanford University, as long as I've been here since 2016, that's not really, the only opportunity we get is when we get a new form from a student and we see that the class is obviously online. Like if it's a self-paced type of thing, like, or if the syllabus shows that it was an online class, those are the instances that we've, had to be like, hey, there's a limit here, but how do we cap that? That's all been manual reviews, basically having to review it every single time. wasn't the best way, but that's why we had been trying to change the policy for all these years. But because it wasn't considered high priority until COVID, we weren't able to get that movement on that until that happened. So in a way, COVID sort of was this opportunity for us to reassess all of our policies and practices to be like, are these the best possible things we could be doing? Is this, does this all make sense? So when we switched to online, the first thing we did was like, let's dig up the original Senate documentation from the 90s to understand the sort of intent behind this policy, to pick it apart, which is what we really could have been doing the whole time and wanted to be able to do the whole time. But, again, one person doing this and just priorities and bandwidth hasn't made it feasible for a long time. But yeah, so it's a policy, but it was sort of an unenforceable policy in any real systemic way. So it's a kind of embarrassing answer, but Stanford also does not have a degree audit system yet. One of my teams is building that. So it's like, there's a lot of things we're playing a little bit of catch up for.
All right, thanks for that. And that was a great insight into how many institutions have looked at this and have dealt with this process, especially with different learning modalities. So I'm going to run through a couple of these before we go to the next topic, and then I'll turn it back to Kylie to monitor chat. So Edwin asked a question: how long is it taking you to process the receipt of transcripts? From a higher ed global perspective, it's varying. Most transfer offices are saying that their float times have gone up from 7 to 14 days based on what I know and aware of. At my institution, just on our end, it's only a couple of days to process a transcript, get it through evaluation. That's because we leverage electronic transcript exchange as much as possible. And EDI, I highly recommend that because it gets rid of mailing processes from that end. So it will depend. I think that from soup to nuts, especially over the summer, a lot of institutions from from mailing to receipt to processing, it would take an overall kind of average of 28 days overall again, and that's summertime in a COVID pandemic. So that says as far as people were pushing it, but there are groups that are talking about that in different listservs around the country. So, the bottom line bumper sticker on that is leverage EDI, and it helps, or electronic exchange, it helps quite a bit. And there's the speedy, I can't do an ACRO presentation without plugging an ACRO committee. There's the speedy committee that helps institutions with that and learn about that. Robin has a great question about incoming transfers with years of credit or non-credit based on COVID rules where they got rid of GPA calcs. How do you figure out whether that transfers in or not? So that's one of those institutional rules. However, here's a couple of things. There are some institutions I know that for the credit and non-credit grading for the period of COVID, they are letting you know what the grade coordination is. If it isn't, most schools will say, a D or D minus is still passing. So you'd think credit is equivalent to that. Some schools are giving writers and transcripts that give clarification on it's a C level or not for transfer, et cetera. I can say most institutions for a credit basis may be accepting courses in credit in transfer, but when it comes to college level math, English proficiencies, those type of things, they actually won't. They'll either call the school or get more information on that. So some schools are bifurcating the difference between credit transfer for a kind of a general domain or an elective domain versus some of those heavy hitters for the school, depending on what they are, whether they're English composition, math, or required course of major study. Morgan responded to Edwin on their published timeframe, so that's great. Edwin asked another question: do you bring in all credit from previous institutions or only credit that's applicable to the degree being pursued at your institution? That is up to each institution. I think on that one, are you talking about if there's, well, we can get in that one later. So most institutions right now are bringing in most everything they can because of the situation that people are in. That is dependent though on the school and the school type. But the idea of what's on a transcript and reciprocity is quite a diverse topic. Edwin, Robin, okay. Robin, Ali answered Robin's questions. Sometimes that's close to ask. And Edwin, okay. So we have a lot of people that are answering questions. So that's awesome. So keep answering our peers' questions in the chat. That's perfect. We want to see that happen. So let's go ahead and I'll turn it back over to Kylie to help let me know if there's any questions that are coming in about the topic I'm talking about. But we'll move on to working with unofficial transcripts. And so this one is kind of a subset of things that people are working a lot with the COVID issues. But it's interesting that, and I'll put it this way, if you ever want to know how to work with unofficial transcripts, if you have an international admissions and transfer credit wing in your institution, go down and walk to their offices and ask them how they deal with that world, because they'll give you all the answers on how to work with dealing with the a lack of having a quote unquote official transcript that came directly issued from the institution. So working with the unofficials right now, especially with COVID, and if there's problems with getting a validation or the exact official transcript, what you can do in certain cases that can speed things up or help is actually take an unofficial from the student and then either contact the prior school attended or actually send things out for verification for the prior school attended and accept the student in a provisional or conditional basis. If you have and some schools will accept this process, if you have a student version or an unofficial, and they can have the receiving institution countersign and validate the accuracy of that document, and you have both documents on file as an exceptionary basis, you can do that. Now, some schools, of course, will still want to only deal with official transcripts or require the official to come in later on. That's absolutely appropriate. Each school can do their own thing. But some schools were in the height of the pandemic, there was difficulty with validating the exact document on, security paper, et cetera, and you wanted to assist the student not to have their studies encumbered, there was different ways to do that. Sometimes if you can get a verbal, I don't prefer verbal verifications. I know some schools have done working with the verbals. I usually like a countersigned document or a verification in writing from the institution or getting an official later on. And the reason I say talk to your international cohorts, not most, that's hyperbole. There's many countries where the transcript the student receives that's in their possession is the only thing they may ever get. And there's not document mobility. We kind of get lucky in the United States where we have document mobility and it seems easy to get things. In other different countries, that's not the case. And so a lot of times you have to actually validate through a countersign or validate through a different third verification process. The other thing that you can do, especially, and this happens with students that may be at closed institutions, if there is a custodian of the transcript for a closed institution and the only unofficial that you can get is the one in the student's possession, generally the custodian can validate that as well, or a prior school the student attended. So for example, if I have a student that previously went to, I'll just use Kylie's school, Stanford, and then went to Oregon later on, and then is coming to my institution and they're unable to get their Stanford transcript, but Oregon has a copy on file that they validated, sometimes you can use kind of that kind of, I call it chain of custody, to validate that. So there's a lot of different things to do with unofficial transcripts. It's a higher topic now because, again, of the issues with document mobility that are happening because of the pandemic. Some seems like it's easy and normal to get to, and some are harder. So with that being said, I'm going to check with Kylie to see if there's any questions or any other best practices or items that people want to talk about on this topic.
I do see in the chat, Julia Funaki has posted about just the plug about contacting the international department about how to deal with unofficial docs if there's any confusion. So there's a link in there through ACRO as well that I think they published at some point this past year as guidance for that. So that's really helpful if you're dealing with a lot of international credentials or documents that you're trying to work through, especially if they're unofficial. And then let's see here, Bobby responded to Edwin's class with respect to how George Mason is doing things based on what's college level classwork, and that they basically explaining their policy for what they include. But yeah, that's what I'm seeing in the chat. And I responded, I think one of the questions, I think about, what is this? I think it was Shelley, the most obvious modifications for a faculty to accept articulation is accepting online modality. And I was writing in the chat as a response, but can share it here as well. I don't know if I read this sort of statement as it was intended. So Shelley, please feel free to correct me if I'm mistaken this. But was just sort of around if there are institutions that are kind of struggling to get faculty on board and get that buy-in around kind of shifting their perspective about online sort of offerings. I mentioned it briefly just about how Stanford, our policy was super dated. It, hadn't really been revisited in a long time. One of the biggest reasons behind the outright ban and limitation on online credit that we had was based on this sort of perception that online work back in the 90s wasn't up to snuff, wasn't as rigorous as sort of an in-person offering. The way I was going to put sort of what we ended up doing, we ended up using a really interesting argument to kind of counteract that. And to finally sort of get that buy-in, which was, Stanford, as most institutions did, have to abruptly switch everything to online. And we were still charging full tuition. And so the argument was that hey, you're saying that our classes are still up to snuff, still at the same level of rigor because we can charge the same tuition with an online version of these classes that used to be in person, then it would follow that this is acceptable to, kind of remove this sort of rude ban on online credit. So that's the argument that we were able to deploy and get in front of the faculty. And they were like, oh, I don't know if they really liked that. It was kind of a weird argument, but it was a really interesting thing because I think a lot of
yes, you are.
Oh, hello. Okay. Michael, are you trying to speak or
It was not me.
Oh yeah. Well, the other person was on here as Michael. Michael, here I'll mute that just in case. You're welcome to come off mute if you want to chat though.
Yeah, I put it in the chat there, but if you do want to add anything without typing, we'd love to hear your voices.
Please do. Yeah, that's the gist. So I don't know if Shelley, if that answered or responded to that comment in the way that it was you were hoping for, but hopefully that. Happy to chat about how to get the faculty on board for that. I don't know that was the best argument that we could have made, but it was the one that worked to get the policy in place. But yeah.
All right. So let me see if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions about this topic before we move on to the next one in either out loud or by chat. I'll give it about 30 seconds and then we'll go to the next one.
Oops, sorry, really quickly, I wanted to chime in because I think Edwin sent this to me directly, but I think it's a really good question and I'd like to pose it for the group because I can't answer this one. Has the change in regional accreditation had any impact on accepting credits from what we used to deem as not regionally accredited? And have any of you changed the way that you see credits from those institutions? That's a really great question, Edwin. I don't have an answer for that, or I don't know. I haven't seen that. If Gabby's still on the call, if she wants to chime in on that, or anybody else, you're also welcome to chime in on that, either on chat or coming off of mute. I thought that was a great question. Thank you for asking.
It's almost like Edwin's a plant because the next bullet point we have is handling transfer credit as a result of recent accreditation changes. So many of you are aware, so I'll tee this up and this hopefully will help answer Edwin's question and also go through a couple of things or considerations for the group. So many of you are aware that the notion of regional and national accreditation got disintegrated in the past year. I think that's the polite way of saying it. And so as part of that, there, was a lot of well-founded reasons why different groups wanted to do that. But from a transfer perspective, it really made people's jobs a little more difficult. So what do you do when there's just accreditation versus regional or national accreditation? And so what many institutions had, and I'll point actually back to also, there's the ACRO, a couple of different transfer documents on Bill of Rights and also the Joint Statement on Transfer Credit Award. So many institutions only accept transfer credit based on regional accreditation at the university level. Now, there are others, and there's a case for this to look at national accreditation and transfer as long as the national accreditation credits and program the student was enrolled in applied to a degree program. Now, what we're seeing a lot of institutions do is they'll use the regional versus national as a straight filter, although There's no regional versus national anymore. And then they'll look at the nationally accredited credits as kind of prior learning assessment. What the trends are in higher ed overall is to, as institutions may start looking at the nationally accredited schools for potentially prior learning or some other sort of assessment, as they start to create a database or review of those credits that makes sense from different schools, especially those that are degree granting and the courses are applied to a degree, and you know what the faculty credentials are at the school, et cetera, you may start adding that into your own kind of transfer database or transfer policies. So the recommendation on this at a high level is the changes in accreditation overall should not necessarily change your institutional policies, which each one of your institutional policies are your own thing. So I want to be very clear, just because this change does not change what an institution should or shouldn't do based on their own policies. However, what both ACRO, ACE, and many other organizations would say as far as the joint statement on transfer credit is that accreditation on its own should not only be the only filter you use. You should be evaluating things at deeper levels, because our goal is to educate and make sure that we're supporting our communities and students in higher learning. That may mean that most national credit schools don't make sense for what your goals are as an institution, and that's perfectly fine. But again, as you look deeper on this, it's something that should be reviewed and evaluated. So long and short on this, there's a lot of kind of hand wringing on what the changes mean for a transfer office. The changes really shouldn't be dramatic for you, other than be sure that you're looking at things, and especially if your school's open to prior learning assessment and you start to find, I'm sorry, I saw the chat. And as you start to find schools that may make sense that were nationally accredited, where the degrees and those courses can transfer, open things up as it makes sense, and you do your own evaluation and your assessment and document those policies. So that is kind of the long and short of what's happening. Again, I know it's a huge conversation point. A lot of people have had some concerns about it, but you are your own schools and you set your own policies. And if that was, if it's instead of just using the filter of regional or national, if you say, I'm only accepting MSA, HLC, SACs, your alphabet soup of what your bodies are, accept that, but have reason for it. And that's the only thing that I think you'll find from whether it's the department or even other agencies or even state. And this is the area that you might find state regulators may start to put pressure on. Why do you do what you do? Have a rationale for it. And that is the best way to approach it. So Kylie, I will stop there to see, I see the chat moving, so that's why I got distracted for a second. Any questions or any things that we want to throw out, or other items from that end? So.
I wanted to point out, I plopped in, because you were bringing them up, the joint statements. I plopped in the link to the joint statement, as well as the ACRO documents that were created for both the Student Bill of Rights and Institutional Bill of Rights. And if you're an institution that has never seen these sort of resources, I highly recommend checking these out. ACRO has been a sort of big sort of guiding point in terms of how we think about transfer credit and the guidance that it provides. So these are really awesome resources that I highly recommend. Again, if you haven't checked them out already, but since Marc was talking about those, I plopped those in there. Let's see here. I think this was Susan was mentioning, I'm seeing the chat going off on here. I'm trying to follow through. Susan was mentioning from University of Northern Colorado that they have an option for students to petition the department to accept credit from other institutions or other accreditation types outside of regional, but it's not often used. And then I think Josie was interested in sort of trying to develop one on their own. But yeah, to sort of echo what you already said, Marc, every school is different and they make up their own sort of transfer policies. But I think the one thing you said about being able to justify, right? Like when, if any sort of accrediting body or some other group comes in and says, why do you do what you're doing? What's the justification, the rationale, whatever? That's a really big thing to have in place, to know why you have stuff set up, right? To start with the why always. Because if the why doesn't make sense anymore, like how it did for Stanford with the online credit, which is like way different, but so one of the elements of our sort of transfer policies is if it doesn't make sense anymore, or if things have changed in a way that you're like, hey, we could probably modify this to be this instead, then yeah, that's something. And even if you don't have the answer, like there's a number of policies I'm sure that all of you have run into throughout this past year that, you realized, hey, we should probably revisit this at some point, whether you were able to make it happen during COVID year or not. And so, even if it doesn't make sense right now, or you looked at it and it didn't make sense, as long as you have the justification to sort of say, hey, this is why this is here, and or that we're thinking about changing this. So yeah, so more chat stuff coming through, but yeah, that was a good one.
So I saw Andrew's question. I do actually want to read this out, and I want to provide some clarifications on it. So his question was, we were under the impression that the Department of Education limited a regional and national accreditation. There is now only institutional accreditation. Was this optional? So Andrew, really good question. So here's a couple of things. You are absolutely correct. The Department of Education removed that there is any distinction between regional or national accreditation. There is just accreditation. Now, the Department of Education runs Title IV programming and funding. And so for the purposes of aid eligibility as an institution to be able to get Title IV, there is not a distinction between regional or national. There's just accrediting bodies. Now, from that end, and going to another question that came up, and I'll get into that, as an institution, you could say, I only accept, and you have to change the language of your policy, I only accept XYZ bodies that were regionally accredited. And that's actually how schools have to rewrite things if they want to have a distinction, because there is no such qualifier as regional or national anymore, but there is still, LASC, SACS, HLC, NCA, all those regional bodies. And so you have to nuance that. So if there is a distinction for your transfer operations, you want to indicate what those bodies are. And if you decide to add on a national body, like I believe ACICS, some of those other ones, and I think that, whoever it's going to be, in ACICS may be the one that got in trouble. I forgot. That's just the one on top of my mind. So it's probably the one that did. But if that's the one, then you want to indicate how you want to delineate your policies. There was a question about banner, and I don't know about banner, but here's something I would say, and I think Josie said, are banner institutions recording institutions accreditation status? And so, but that's a screen in banner. I don't have banner, but I know enough that I think that's a screen as far as an acronym. I don't know if they are, but I'll tell you this. If you have a transfer database, by all means, you shouldn't be recording the type, regional or national, but recording the body. And also it's really important, and this is something I have conversations with the SIS providers on at different times. You not only should be recording the accreditation type, but the dates of accreditation, including candidacy types. It's a whole long tail conversation that we can save for another forum, but knowing what to do when a school's in candidacy, not candidacy, whether you accept it or not, and when you are doing some automated transfer credit evaluations or using your database, knowing those dates actually becomes more important than you ever thought it was. So that's just kind of in the weeds. So if they aren't, they should, to include dates. Okay. Anything else, Kylie, that I may have missed?
Nope, the only question I was going to bring up was Josie's about the banner institutions. I had to tried to quickly Google what SOABGTA is. But yeah, I also assumed it was a page in there, but we're PeopleSoft school, so I didn't know what that was. So that was the only question I saw outside of that. I think you got everything else.
Okay, cool. All right, so the next topic we kind of had as a topic that came up was Pla Reciprocity. So with PLA becoming more open, and I'm using the macro definition of PLA. So I'm including ACE credits, CLEP, DSST, to include portfolio credits. What do you do on PLA reciprocity? And what that means is if you receive a transcript and the transcript has said, the student took a CLEP in English Comp, they have 15 military credits that could from ACE, and they had a portfolio evaluation at the prior school. What do I do with all of those credits, and how do I provide reciprocity for it? So should I carry it forward or not? Now, typically the best practice is not to carry it forward just on the transcript alone. So you typically do want to order your own, if it's a CLEP transcript from the College Board, an ACE transcript, or a JST, for military credits, et cetera, you do want to have those on record on file. Now, there are a few things that are unique. In the past, some of the ACE transcripts would actually carry forward some of the DSST exams, and that some schools actually do carry forward as reciprocity because the DSST exams were so tightly wound and you had all the information you needed to make the transfer decision because it was military related. But generally, you want to require all the original documents. As far as it relates to a portfolio evaluation or the individualized evaluation a school previously did for the student when they attended before, what you want to do is two things. One is you want to make sure that you have a process that clearly advises the student however it is they get that credits at your school, because odds are you're not going to just carry it forward just because you don't know the assessment process that was used at the prior school. Now, when you have schools in, let's say, community colleges, if you're a regional state institution, or high feeders, what is recommended is you can actually get to a place where if you understand the assessment process, and I'll give you an example of a hypothetical example. If I'm in Arizona, so if I wanted to partner with the Maricopa Community Colleges and our academics meet with my school's academics meet with the Maricopa leadership, and we understand from soup to nuts how they're assessing a portfolio or industry learning, and it matches our standard definition of a credit hour and all those things because we are getting tons of students from that district or that area, it may be worth your time to provide reciprocity and transfer those indirectly, as long as you understand that. It is okay to do so, especially if you make it on an exception basis and have the documentation. And one of the guiding principles I would always share about transfer is just document what you are doing and be very clear about what you are up to. Because if their standard credit definition hours and their assessment process and their faculty level and credentials meet yours, having your internal staff do a portfolio evaluation or an industry review is kind of a waste of time when you already know it would be good to go. So there are times where you do want to do your own evaluations and have that process break down, the hours attended, all of those different type of things. And there's other times when or if you can, and you have high feeders and you as a transfer office continue to see the same thing over and over, and then you put a student through their own separate evaluation process, it may be worth your time to create a reciprocity agreement. So you're going to see more and more of this, especially considering the place we are as, I'll put it this way, in a world of higher education, there is more and more a push for industry certifications, credentials, learning that comes from outside of the classroom that can be translated into work and skill performance to create academic credit for that or coordinate it back to academic credit. So you're going to keep seeing these random things. And if you see these random things over and over from one school, then you might want to look at doing those type of agreements. So that is what I have to say. So I did see, actually, let me actually answer Edwin's question from Straighterline and Sophia. So I just saw it pop up in front. Edwin, you get the gold star of the day for the questions, by the way. So the one thing about Straighterline and Sophia, here's a couple of things. You have to know that for Straighterline Sophia, and there's also study.com, they are evaluated by ACE, and there are credit recommendations from ACE. So there's a difference between, not a difference, but some schools will say, I don't take Straighterline or Sophia credits or study.com, but I take ACE credits and I'll take whatever credit recommendation comes from ACE. If that student orders you an ACE transcript and it's on there and your school hasn't delineated between that, you're going to end up actually putting those on account. So each school should decide what they want to do. Sophia, and for those that don't know, Sophia study.com, Straighterline, they are non-university or non-collegiate training providers that all ultimately result in assessments that are proctored that come with credit recommendations. They trade on the currency that ACE provided a credit recommendation, but they oftentimes don't have the student order the ACE transcript. They want to send the transcript directly from the issuing entity, being Study, Sophia, et cetera. So it kind of depends. There's a lot of institutions and they've decided it doesn't meet the standards, and most of the Study and Sophia and Straighterline courses are general education related. They've decided it doesn't meet the standard of their faculty qualifications, so they don't take it. But just be aware, it is possible that someone can order the ACE transcript. And if you take ACE and you don't want this, but yet you have a transfer policy that says you take ACE, you may find yourself accepting it. So you just have to be careful with that. That doesn't make it wrong. Just know that you can get this in two forms. One can be Sophia's transcript and one can be the ACE transcript. And that's kind of a hard lesson to learn if you didn't want it. And suddenly now you have an ACE transcript and the student's like, it's recommended for 3 credits in the baccalaureate category of science, give it to me. So anyway, that's that question. Edwin's a great one. So Kylie, anything?
Yes, okay, good. I was like waiting to hit that mute button. I wanted to interject because I saw Josie raised their hand up. So I wanted to make sure we have our first person that's going to speak up.
Okay.
So welcome. Please feel free to come off mute, and there's a couple more questions in chat we can get to after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was honestly just going to ask, when it comes to documenting, you know, these are the feeder institutions we would accept the PLA credit from. We're not going to make the student jump through the same hoop twice. What's an example of what that would be? I'm guessing it's probably something very vague. You don't want to be too specific, but at the same time, you know, what can you give an example of what your policy would say?
I'm gonna give that one to you, Mark, because we don't have much PLA at Stanford
Yeah. So
at all.
Josie,
So.
I'm actually going to ask you to, my computer cut out for a second. So I heard like one word from you. So I apologize. It's of course the one time we have a verbal question I didn't hear. What was the question again? It related to PLA. I know that much. That's all I got.
Sorry, can you explain what your policy says about, you know, how you guys accept PLA credit from your high feeder institutions? Like, I'm guessing it's probably something slightly vague so that there's wiggle room, but you can't be too vague at the same time. So how do you explain, or what does your policy say that it says, you know, we have the right to decide to accept PLA credit awarded by another institution or not? Like, can you give an example of that?
Yeah, so our alternative credit or non-traditional credit policy says we have the authority to decide credit that can be accepted from alternative sources, alternative means, providing it goes through a faculty evaluation process that our academics have determined that the credit is, or the learning, actually, it's not credit, it's all about learning. The learning is equal to or greater than what the student would receive natively at our institution. That's kind of the basis for it. So it gives you wiggle room, but you have to have faculty involvement. At that point with the high feeder institution, that's our policy. So our policy says that. Now we have to document behind that. So for example, if it was Maricopa Community Colleges, we would actually have a packet that would say Maricopa Community College's assessment process is thus when they are looking at industry credentials that equate to amount of whether it's seat time, learning, et cetera. Our assessment process is comparable and why, and this is why we will accept this moving forward, because we can trust that if they are transcripting and taking ownership for their academic processes and we agree with their academic processes, it's okay. And then we'll put them on a list of, so our transfer office has a list of PLA reciprocity at that point. So it says, if there is PLA credit that is from this institution, it's got to be, it can't be like PLA credits for 3 credits portfolio. Like we know nothing about that. It's got to be specific to what the learning was, and we'll go forward and we'll not have the student go through a full assessment at that point. Now, again, it's about those 2 agreements between the institutions, and you have to make sure the assessment is right. And you know, all of those things have to meet up for your learning, but it goes back to the learning is greater than and equal to what the student would get at a native institution, which is in essence what you do with ACE. When you accept an ACE evaluation, you're accepting that ACE did the work properly to evaluate the military. You trust that they say it's 3 baccalaureate credits in whatever and so domain, and you trust that, and because you trust that, you accept it without going through your own evaluation on your end. So that's kind of how it works. Perfect.
I wanted to shout out, there was a question, or let me see here, what was this? A question from Brittany Burton. I think you answered part of this, Mark, but I wanted to, I guess, pose this to Brittany. If there are any elements of your question about, do you have an agreement template for a PLA reciprocity agreement? If there's any elements of that you're still hoping to get, then please chime in or put something in the chat so we know, but I thought that was a I think we answered part of that, but I don't know if we wanted to, if there were any links to templates or whatnot that we wanted to include. From Brittany. So if you're on still, you want to ask.
So Brittany, I would say this, I don't have a template that you know of because it's individual to each institution partnership. So it looks a little different. A lot of it is, it's not a contract. So a lot of it's academic-y type speak on, this is your standard, you know, each institution should set a standard credit definition of a credit hour, learning, et cetera. And you create a kind of unifying language around that. And then again, your policy dictates at a high level, you want your policy to say, we will do this, and then lists out who the people are at that point. And some schools, even high feeders, here's the problem with some high feeders on this is some they'll just say, we gave the student 15 portfolio credits and you have no idea what's in there. At that point, you have to do the homework, even if it was a high feeder, because they don't do that. And that's not a good school for some of the reciprocity stuff. But good question. And we can dig into that at different times in the future too. So we have 5 minutes left. There's a couple of things I want to do before we end, because it's going to help Kylie and I and the Transfer and Articulation Committee in the future. We will come back, and if hopefully there's a demand for this, we'll come back to a future forum and talk about calculating ROI for transfer offices. But one of the things we wanted to do is, and if you could, before you leave the meeting in the chat, there's a couple of questions we have, because we're going to be able to save the chat and get back to it. First, we want to know, is there a desire and a want for these type of things in the future? And if so, what would that cadence be? So if you could put in the chat, yes, a desire, and you'd want to see something like this offered by ACRO monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, so we can kind of source those ideas, because, you know, again, this is the first time we've done this from that end. The other thing is, if there's topics, if you want to see these in the future that you're interested in, let us know what the topics are, because this was a little different. Again, this was more me guiding the discussion, mainly because we didn't know how this was going to work and wanted to make sure that you didn't have blank space or dead air, if you will, from that end. So what are those topics? And then also format ideas or changes in the format. So just kind of drop things in the chat. I'm going to ask Mike to leave the chat open for 5 minutes after one, just in case it takes some time for people to type before we end the meeting. And then last but not least, if you are part of ACRO, and whether it's transfer or otherwise, I just have to plug, because I'm a committee chair, submit sessions to ACRO 2022. It's in Portland. We always love to have people speak on your expertise, whatever that may be. So submit sessions for ACRO's upcoming conference. The submission proposals end at the end of the month. So August 31st is the last day for submissions. And the last thing I want to give a thanks to the Transfer and Articulation Committee. They are on, oops, my header on my slide is wrong. But the Transfer and Articulation Committee is on the right side. These are all our committee members. In the future, they will be possibly leading the meeting or part of this group. So it may not be me and Kylie, it may be other people from this. The last thing is, and here I'll leave this up for a little bit, is some resources that ACRO has, as well as just different tools and organizations related to transfer and awarding of credit. So I'm going to stop there, and that's pretty much all the content we had for you today on that end, and see if there's anything else, etc.
I'm seeing an interesting split between both monthly and quarterly, so I'll need to tally all of these up, but definitely I'm seeing a lot of folks popping in things. I've seen a couple of topic ideas for like international evaluations, and then Josie just popped a couple in here as well, so thank you for including those. If you have questions that like dawn on you after this session, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Mark via email. I really like, someone mentioned an idea of having a sort of web form on the ACRO website. So we can definitely take that back to think about, to solicit topics. So that's something we can take back to the committee to sort of debrief on how we can do that in a way that, you know, not everybody's going to remember our email addresses and whatnot. And so that's totally fine. But yeah, we can thank you for all of you that have been popping questions and that have been engaging with us. Thank you for putting this up, Mark. There's our contact information as well. on there. So you're welcome to reach out to us or anybody as part of the ACRO Transfer and Articulation Committee, because again, it's not always going to be me and Mark hosting these sessions. Some great ideas coming up already. So this is so exciting. I'm so glad to see this. But yeah, thank you all for coming and joining us. We are really looking forward to being able to sort of tackle some of the hot topics that have been coming up in your areas. Again, if you have any of those topic ideas, don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you have any questions or whatnot, again, don't reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out. And yes, we are so happy you are all here. And yeah, thank you so much for your suggestions and topic ideas.
Great. Yep. And I just wanted to say thanks to both Kylie and Marc for leading us so well today. Appreciate you guys driving the discussion. As Marc said, I'll leave the session open technically for another few minutes just so people can put their preferences in terms of topics that might be focused on next time and meeting format as well as meeting frequency. Since there's so much in the chat, I'll just send an email to everybody that registered, whether you attended or not, with that chat log. So it'll be a bit easier to kind of sift through things. I was going to say, now that everything's in here, it's kind of redundant. I could have made a poll or sent a post-meeting survey. That might have worked well for this, but since everyone's already kind of submitted things, maybe I'll hold off on that. So yeah, thanks for coming. You can stay and chat if you'd like, but I'll keep this open until 4:05. Thanks, everybody.
I think we have the majority is monthly. I've tallied this 5, 10, 15, 22 at monthly and 7 quarterly.
Okay, perfect. So I need to jump for another meeting. I was back to back today. So, but great job, Kylie. Good idea. So we did it. So
Yay! I'll hang on in case anything wild comes up in the last part of
well
the.
done. Well, there's only a few people left. I guess we could actually just ask them directly if they have any input they want to add. Otherwise, we can just
Are we publishing the recording to the ACRO web page?
So the recording is available using the same link that you used to join the live session today. So it'll take a little while to process because Zoom, if you're not familiar, does a live transcription of whatever is being said for accessibility reasons. So it might take half an hour or so, but by the end of the day today, you'll be able to use the same link to look at the recording. And if you want to refer other people to it, then you can use the actual site link or the event link, whatever, and that will just kick them directly to the stream.
Okay, perfect. Oh, now I'm trying to like grab all these questions. I think some of these people fell off already, so I'm trying to like see if I can ping these folks.
No problem, Ajia. Yeah, it happens. Unfortunately, Zoom, I think it just lists a whole bunch of time zones, but maybe one day we can get it to add a calendar invite that properly matches whatever time zone you're in.
Yeah, I've made that mistake. I think there was like a book club, an ACRO book club for how to be an anti-racist, and I'm such a dingus. I was like, it was posted in Eastern Standard Time. I'm like, oh, cool. Let's make sure we translate this to Pacific. And then I put it on my calendar for like the wrong hour because I forgot. I don't know what I did. So that I definitely spaced on that. And I logged in like 1 minute early is what I thought, 1 minute early. And then it ended up being
1 minute before.
Like they were just wrapping up. I was like, no.
Yeah, it
devastated.
Is. It's it's the nature, I guess, of a nationwide organization. We've got to. I mean, we can do better. We'll find a way to do better.
Well, it does give an option to, I think, add stuff to the calendar. I think
Yeah,
when you do registration.
the registration, the Zoom invite has a little thing, but we should maybe, I think maybe just call more attention to it. Just you'll receive an invite link or the join link from Zoom. Make sure that you add it to your calendar or something like that. There's only so much we can do, but
Yeah. Yes, that's true. I know when I sent out the blast to everybody on my LinkedIn and like on my email or whatever, I was like made sure to put the Pacific Standard Time on there instead of trying to make anybody do the math for that.
yeah, technically speaking, you can have multiple people join from the same link also. So you could even sometimes when I need people to join something without any mess ups, I'll just include my join link. So you might have 10 or 15 Kylie Borges,
Oh.
and it'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. But
Oh, that's
at least they
interesting. I've
get
never
in
seen
there.
that. I recently did like a felting craft class to make like a little, it doesn't matter, to make a succulent, but it was like, I had to use this, like our executive assistant ended up registering everyone. It was a Zoom call. But they had it where it's like, we basically had to use her login for all of us. So like all 4 or 5 of my staff were in there as like this person's name. So the host was like, what is happening? She'd never seen that before. But
Yeah, no, I see it all the time, and you know, I'm pretty used to it at this point. I know somebody just forwarded the email that they got, and that, I mean, we figure the more people, the better for these type of things. So even if they've got the same name, we know that they're different people, so they'll bring their perspectives.
yes.
All right, looks like we've hit the 4:05 time mark. So, yep, I'll make sure that I send out the chat log to everybody. But otherwise, I appreciate you joining and appreciate you presenting today, Kylie.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having us, and thanks for getting us set up on tech earlier and throughout.
All right,
Awesome.
bye everybody.
Cool. Have a good rest of your week. Thanks.
You too.